the ulama, but really the great ulama. And they have been clearly identified. There are ones that are agreed upon, and then there's ones that are not agreed upon. An agreed upon scholar would be somebody like Abu Hamid al-Ghazali, Fakhruddin al-Razi. I mean, obviously the early period, the four imams, people like, and then each one, according to al-Isfarayini, each one has his area of expertise that he's known for. So, for instance, in Usul al-Fiqh, Imam al-Ghazali is probably, if not the greatest, certainly one of the greatest of the Usuli scholars in the history of Islam. And then in tafsir, somebody like Imam Tabari or Imam al-Qurtubi or Qadi Abu Bakr ibn al-Arabi, or from the Hanafi school, somebody like Imam al-Tahawi in fiqh. And then in hadith, Ibn Batal or Qadi Iyad or Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani or Imam al-Aini. I mean, these are agreed upon imams because their books are used. Then you have the ulama that you'll find differences of opinion about, like Ibn Taymiyyah, Ibn Arabi, the famous philosophical Sufi, who was also a muhaddith and a mufassir, like Ibn Taymiyyah, who was a muhaddith and a mufassir. These were actually encyclopedic giants in terms of the actual amount of information that they had amassed in the religion. But you'll find ulama differ about them. So some ulama will say that Ibn Taymiyyah is a kafir, and then other ulama will say he's Shaykh al-Islam. Some ulama will say about Ibn Arabi that he's Shaykh al-Akbar, and then other ones will say he's a kafir. So you'll find this in the tradition. You'll find these splits. With those type of imams, generally the Ahl Sunnah tended to avoid them. You will find areas where they were greatly honored, but overall their books were not read a lot. Now, in the case of Ibn Arabi, I think he did have quite a following in the Ottoman tradition, and certainly in Syria he had a lot of followers, and in Iran, oddly enough, the Iranians honor him largely through Al-Qashani's work, because the Irfani tradition that's there uses him. So my point being is that you're going to find the imams that people differ about, and then you'll find the ones. Now, Abu Hamid, to be fair, there was some difference early on. There were ulama that rejected him, like Imam al-Maziri and Abu Bakr al-Tartushi, Sidi al-Harazim. The ummah pretty much agreed upon his imamah. They called him Hujjat al-Islam, the proof of Islam. And so the idea now, because you have groups that attack him, historically he was not attacked. He was really honored in the community. Some people considered him weak in hadith, and towards the end of his life he started reading hadith quite assiduously. But prior to that, he was more known for his fiqh and for his tasawwuf. So his tazkiyah, which is the ihya. And he's considered a mujaddid by, I mean, the ulama, as far as I can tell, they're pretty much agreed upon that he was the mujaddid of that period of time that he lived in, and his effects still go on. And so my point being that you will find differences of opinion. And those that are agreed upon, they also are under the microscope. So not all of their opinions are taken. And over time, they'll look back and scholars will say, well, he was wrong here, he was wrong there. So it's not like everybody, just because they reach that level, that they're not open to criticism. They are. And they will be criticized. Some of their opinions will be challenged by later scholars. During their lifetime, generally, the ulama say, you know, they call them, Imam al-Qarafi mentioned, I think, that the fuqaha were like tuyus ala zariba. They're like goats fighting over the garbage heap. You know, there's a lot of hasad amongst scholars, which was traditionally wise. Contemporaneous scholars did not bear witness against other scholars. You have to really kind of wait to see what the ummah says down the road about them, because their contemporaries will often be against them simply because there's sickness in the souls, and they have hasad, and the ulama themselves have those sicknesses. But over time, those greats become part of the canon, and their books enter into the canon. And this is why you will find certain books are studied over and over and over again throughout history. And those are the most important books to read, because they're given a tawfiq, and they're given an honorific position in the library of the Muslims. When somebody like Ibn Arabi, to use as an example, somebody like Ibn Arabi, who was trained in Andalusia, and most of his shuyukh were in Andalusia, he comes to Konya, and he ends up giving khutbah and teaching and marrying in the culture here. His son-in-law, Sadruddin al-Qunawi, was one of the great muhaddithin of that time. Al-Ajluni said that Ibn Arabi was considered a thiqah in hadith during his time. So his hadith were sound. The point being is that you could have somebody from a completely different culture in Spain come to Turkey, and they fit right in with the ulama. It's really something stunning about the Islamic civilization. And so if you go, for instance, you know, I studied largely with Mauritanians, but the books that I studied, when I meet people from the Deoband Madrasa, they studied a lot of the same books because they're in the same tradition. And even if they aren't the same books, the subject matter is so similar that we know the same technical vocabulary, and we can communicate about these things. Because usul al-fiqh, it differs a little bit in the Hanafi as opposed to the Shafi'i or the Maliki usuli tradition. There's some differences in the mustalahat, but overall, it's very